when they were in Seattle visiting Brady's parents, he baptized 2 of his children.
You know what blew my mind? I'm sure they use similar wording to the FLDS and the mainstream LDS church because all of the priesthood blessings and things and ordinances came from the same place originally, from back when Joseph Smith and Brigham Young introduced these things. I guess if you don't believe in the religion at all, you can't really consider yourself sacrilegious, but if you are still semi-believing in it, I think that someone that would be a part of that church that he came from will look at that and say, oh, blasphemy, how dare he, right? Because it's so similar, but he's just twisting the words just a little tiny bit. So it was a shocker to me to see that. That was one of those pause moments where we had
Sam's face.
I was like, whoa, I did not see that coming. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I was raised in the FLDS community. It is a polygamous group run by Warren Jeffs, and I moved out when I was 18 years old.
I was raised LDS. Sam and I have been married for 9 years and have 2 awesome kiddos.
Yes, we do. We want to quickly thank our donors, YouTube members, and our patrons over on Patreon. We really, really do appreciate your support.
And speaking of our members and our Patreon members, we want to let you know that you can now go check out all the information about the cruise that we are going on in February. You can find that at growingupinpolygamy.com. We have posted the password to get access to that, early access to that page for this week for all of those members. And for everyone else, it'll be coming out on July 1st.
Yes, so we're very, very excited for that. Please feel free to email us if you do have any further questions regarding that. We also had a really great opportunity to finally go out to the Dream Center again and get some before footage of the man's common area, the room that we are going to be redoing for the Dream Center, thanks to all of your donations. And we're also going to be able to post a link to the Amazon wish list. If anyone else does want to get anything off of this Amazon wish list for the room, we will have that available in the description below.
Yes. Today we are excited to finish up My 5 Wives. Finish up because it was only 2 seasons, which after coming off of Sister Wives, having 2 seasons of something, I was like, wow, it feels like we blinked and it was over. But there is still a lot of stuff to compare between him and Cody. The second season, you kind of realize that they're doing polygamy fairly well. I will give them that.
All considered. Brady even said something along the lines of, the only reason that our show didn't get as many good ratings or didn't continue on as long is because we have a functional family and we're happy. There's not as much drama as the Sister Wives and that. So anyway, I kind of agree. There were some moments that both of us were dozing a little bit. But it's because it's very, I don't know, there wasn't a whole lot of really exciting things happening.
Yeah, but those couple things we are going to cover and talk about. They did have a couple moments where they had insights into their religious upbringing, how that affects where they are now. Obviously, the fact that they've left the community, but they're still physically within the community gets brought up later in the season. So there still definitely are a couple things that we wanted to talk about.
Oh, yes, for sure. And we do want to also compare some of the similarities and differences that we saw between the Sister Wives and My 5 Wives. The reason for that is because both of these families came from the same religious background, the same religious group from the AUB. So we find it so intriguing that coming from the same place, you have 2 different families that are completely different in the way that they go about their religious beliefs and their religious traditions.
Well, and not only did they both come from the AUB as families, both of the men, both Cody Brown and Brady Williams, both were mainstream LDS and then converted. And
True.
So I think that adds an interesting element to both of them having kids that want to join the mainstream LDS church and their feelings on that, and the fact that they're welcoming about that. The fact in whether or not they allow the wives to be super outspoken and have opinions compared to other fundamentalist groups where the women aren't allowed to have the opinions and aren't allowed to share what they think, and it's not a community decision, it's more of a patriarchy. So there's definitely a lot of similarities and also big differences between the way the Brown family was and the Williams family.
Something throughout this documentary as well, that My 5 Wives, is that the almost forgot his name, is that Brady Williams had a very high calling in his church. He was a bishop and a 70. And a 70 is just a calling within, well, I guess it's within all Mormonism groups, or at least it's known within all of the groups, as these men that hold this really high position of leadership within the group. I don't know if in the AUB there are actually 70 men, but I know there are in the mainstream LDS church, there are actually 70 men. That's why they're called, they're a member of the 70.
Yeah, or the quorum of the 70. So there's different levels of leadership. There's the quorum of the 70. There's the quorum of the 12, which is also known as the 12 apostles. And then there's the prophet or president of the church and his counselors there. And so I'm also curious whether or not they have the 70 and the 12 and the
I would assume they
presidency.
do. In the FLDS church, at least during the time that I was a part of it, and I know that as it stands right now, in the FLDS church, there are no 12 apostles. There are not members of the 70, these 70 men that are called into this high leadership position. That's not something that I ever saw. And then, of course, many of you know that I actually left the FLDS church and later joined the mainstream LDS church. And at that point is when I became familiar with the way that the quorums and things were set up back in the day. So anyway, it's interesting that these groups have split off, and some continue the same type of leadership positions, and some just completely do away with it. I think that with Warren Jeffs specifically, and maybe a couple before him, they didn't really want to have all of these quorums with so much input on how this church should be run.
One man rule,
and have all the final say. Exactly.
So there's definitely, like we said, lots of comparisons between the two. But getting into season 2 and what was happening with the Williams family, one main theme throughout it was that Noni was trying to get pregnant and wanted to have a baby. And Brady said yes. And so they were trying, and she was talking about how it was harder for her to get pregnant than what it had been before. Now, one thing that I just wanted to point out is that she was talking about this with her other sister wives. One, that's something that the Brown family would not talk about, wanting to get pregnant, I think, to each other.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. They would not share something like that. Like, remember when Robin had her announcement, Robin Brown, right? That it was like a big deal and no one was even excited for the other wives to be pregnant. These wives, the Williams family, some of the other wives knew that they were trying. I think by the end, they all kind of knew. Slowly, she was telling all of them. They all knew that it was coming. She was able to share quickly. Everyone was excited for her. So there's definitely a huge difference in the sister-wife relationship. But she was talking to one of them, talking about how that was really hard on her emotionally, that it was taking a little bit longer for her to get pregnant. And the idea that she might need help getting pregnant, was something that was hard. And she said, well, the way I was raised is that God controls it. And so if I'm not getting pregnant, it's because God doesn't want me to be pregnant. And that made me so sad for them.
Yeah, and she's already had, is it 4? How many children?
5.
She has 5 children already, and she's not old by any means, but she's getting towards the end of her childbearing years, I guess you can call it. And so she's nervous.
What she said.
Is that what I think, yeah. Anyway, so it's just interesting to me that for her, it's this really sad thing that she's not able to have another, making it 6 because of the religious belief that the main reason to get married is to have all of these children and to not prevent these children from coming into your life. Don't use birth control. Have as many as God will possibly give you. And like you said, if you're not able to have them, it's because for some reason God doesn't deem you fit to have more of his spirit children. And so it's this really heavy weight on their shoulders. And I saw that with some of the FLDS women as well, where they were only happy if they were pregnant, basically, or planning to have the next child. Like it seemed to be, for at least for some of these women, that they just wanted children, a child after child. That was their main thing.
Well, and I think in a lot of these groups, like, it ties to the woman's self-worth, right? So that's kind of the same here. If I can have children and have as many as possible, that gives me value to my husband. It gives me value to my church, my community. I'm doing what I'm supposed to, so it gives me value to God. So it's just a good example that even though they were leaving, sometimes untying the emotional connections of being raised in that community and having that in your mind, even though that might not be what she believes anymore, still there's that emotional connection to
Right.
the way she was raised, and feeling like, she kept saying at some points, well, maybe it's not in God's plan for me. Like, maybe it's not in the cards anymore. And we don't see exactly how long it took her to get pregnant, but just her going through that emotional thing was definitely telling of her upbringing within the church.
Yeah.
Now, she was able to get pregnant, and she's pregnant at the same time that their oldest daughter is pregnant with her first baby and their first grandbaby. So Brady
Right.
is going to be a grandfather the month before he has his 25th child. And that was another thing that I was like, this doesn't normally happen in the real, like in the regular world. You're not normally having children at the same time as your children are having children. Within the FLDS.
Yeah, comment below if any of you experienced that, because it's not, I know that it has happened, don't get me wrong, but typically if it's not a polygamous relationship, typically there's not going to be the mother pregnant at the same time as her daughter.
Yeah.
But I know that it does happen, so I'm curious if there are some of you out there that have experienced that, if it's something that is maybe more common than we realize.
Well, and this daughter was from another mother. I
Correct.
think it would have been more weird if it had been the same mother being pregnant at the same time as her daughter, which again, we know happens sometimes. But even Carly, who's the daughter that was pregnant, she said it took her a little bit to get used to the idea. Like, okay, there's going to be an aunt or uncle of my child who's younger than my baby. And I think that would be a little bit hard emotionally, wrapping your head around the fact that instead of your dad becoming like a grandpa, which he still is, right? Like being a
Right.
grandpa and being able to have that kind of role and that kind of relationship, he's also going to be caring for a brand new infant of his own. And I can only imagine that that would be hard to be trying to manage both of those roles. Or even Noni says and asks Brady at one point, like, is that going to be hard for you to switch gears from like grandpa mode to dad mode with babies that are they're going to be a month apart?
Yeah. No, that would be very, very tricky. Speaking, from a mother yourself here.
Yeah.
Would it be hard? I don't know. And maybe I'm just overthinking this, but I have a feeling that there would be some hurt feelings about this, Carly, the daughter having a child, and then one of the mothers coming in right after her and having a child. Is there going to be some feelings of, she's going to steal all my thunder, because Carly's bringing in the first grandchild. It's this big special moment for the family. And then there's going to be a mom that's going to be having a child right after her.
Yeah. Personally, because of the type of relationship that I get to see like our kids have with my parents and watch them be like these amazing grandparents, and their kids had been out of the house and they'd been empty nesters, and they like are pretty close to, they weren't quite empty nesters, but they had all adult children before we had our first. And so it is this exciting, my mom had a baby running forever, and they
all the attention on them.
all the attention. Yeah. And my parents' whole life revolves around their grandbabies, right? So that's really fun to see as a mom, to see your kids be like the entire center universe for your parents. I think is really fun. And I feel like that would be a little hard to recognize that that's not going to be able to be the same case, because they're not going to be able to have your child be the center of their universe at the same time that they're trying to raise a little baby of their own.
Right.
So that would be hard for sure.
Yeah.
I think in a polygamous family, Carly probably realized that there was going to be that possibility, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? So it's like, that's just the hand that you're dealt. Their own son was having a really hard time with it. Their teenage son was not happy when they found out that his mom was pregnant.
Because of the way that that Noni's own son was acting about it, and the surprise and the frustration that he was showing, made me wonder if nobody saw this coming. Even Carly or any of the kids. I wonder if they were completely surprised and taken back by it, because it was very interesting to see Noni's own son very upset at the idea of another child coming in. That was very strange to me. I don't remember ever thinking as a young boy growing up in the FLDS, I don't remember ever having feelings of hurt or frustration when another child was born. So that was interesting. I wonder why he felt so strongly about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it would just be a lot of emotions. I know the older kids have responsibility to help take care of younger kids, so that's a lot on kids.
True.
there's just so many emotional factors, and it's hard in a show to be able to see what his everyday life with his siblings is like. Maybe he has a lot more responsibility than what a typical 15-year-old boy would have, and the idea of having another baby to try to help with would be too much.
And maybe in his family, and this is where maybe the difference between me and him is that maybe in his family he was supposed to be more involved in helping with the children. In my case,
Boys
I
didn't do that.
did
really.
not help with the children. I mean, once the boys were old enough to go out with us older boys and, go on a hike or play some kind of game outside, then sure, we were supposed to look after them and help. But when they were babies, I never considered changing a diaper. It wasn't even, no mom would have required it or asked it of one of us boys. That kind of thing was always the duty of the girls.
You have to help them prepare to be mothers themselves, right?
Right.
Like if you ask Sam's sisters, they had to do all of those things. And Sam talks about being pretty much raised by one of your older sisters
Who was from another mother. So
was his primary caretaker
For a
when he was like
while.
a toddler for a while, right?
which was really great for the helping out the mothers, right? Because some of the sisters were, way older than I was, and so they were like a mother figure in my life, which I thought was awesome growing up, having
Yeah.
so many people there around to watch and take care of. But yes, I definitely had a lot of help from older sisters, specifically one of my older sisters that did. Uh, I mean, I don't remember how long it was, but for quite some time was my primary caretaker.
Yeah. And Sam was that baby. Sam was the baby. Like, he is an uncle to many people who are much older than him.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So-
It's a very strange feeling.
It's very normal in polygamous families. Obviously, here where it's like the tail end of the first grandbaby and the last baby. And like you said, it seemed like it was a little bit of a shock. So maybe people thought that wasn't going to happen. But within polygamous families, it's pretty common.
It is, yes. I remember for Thanksgiving, back when Thanksgiving was allowed in the FLDS church, we would get together, extended family, and have a big celebration. And it was very strange to have all of these people that I looked up to, much older than me, that I would be, playing games with and things. And they were my nephews and my nieces. And it was just such a strange feeling to realize that if they called me Uncle Sam, how strange and weird that would sound, because I was just a little kid. So anyway,
Yeah.
kind of an interesting thing that happens frequently within big polygamous families.
Yeah. Another thing that got kind of brought up this season was double dates and Brady trying to minimize the amount of dates he had to do by doubling them up, which the wives were not a fan of at first. And then they were like, well, that's fine, but we still want our single dates. So it kind of backfired for Brady.
It did. Honestly, I don't. Jeez. People ask me all the time, why did you give up polygamy? You would have been able to have all these women. This would have been, you walked away from something so cool. Oh my gosh. And this is a good reminder when watching things like My Five Wives, where a guy is trying to have a good family and good relationship with his wives. And this is a comparison difference here between Cody and Brady right here too, is Brady was, it seemed anyway in the show, was really trying to have this good relationship. The amount of stress and struggle to try to keep everybody happy and be there for everyone, that's just not something I would even be capable of, because I want to give all of my attention and love to my family. And to be spread so thin would break me.
Yeah, well, and it did break Brady because he ended up in the hospital with a panic attack.
Right.
So the amount of stress on him for trying to do everything. And like you said, I think Brady really tries hard to give attention to all of his wives. Like he kisses every single one of them goodnight. He says good morning to every single one. He puts forth so much effort, I think, to be as fair as humanly possible, which again, being completely fair and equal with 5 other people is impossible. Like nobody can actually do it perfectly, right? There is no perfect when it comes to polygamy, I don't think. But he tries really, really hard, and you can see it taking a toll on him as time goes on.
Yeah, I wonder if, well, and I guess there's no real way to say this or to even try to understand it, because typically if you are in a polygamous family, each wife is going to have a lot of children as well. That's very, very common. I was going to say, I wonder if it would be easier, not easy, but easier for someone like Brady if each of the wives only had one or two children.
Easier or harder? I don't know, because one thing is all the women have their children to focus on, right?
Sure.
Which keeps them busy when Brady's away. But if they didn't have the children to focus on, and you see this a lot when they become empty nesters, like Polly is starting to have kids move away. Carly had moved away, and later their son Josh is leaving on an LDS mission, which we'll get into in a minute. But as people start becoming empty nesters, you can see the void of, well, now I don't have young children to take care of, so that's not keeping me busy. And my husband's not around. And the same thing happened with Mary Brown, too.
I was going to say with Mary Brown.
I know that Cody and her had issues long before she was an empty nester, but watching that transition, and basically she's not going to have any more kids with him. And so it's easy to just kind of be pushed away and doing your own thing, and then all of a sudden they're not getting any attention anymore. So Brady still seems like he's giving Polly attention, but it would be so hard to go to being an empty nester without having your spouse around.
Oh, yes, for sure. And to know that he is focusing his time with other wives and with other wives' children, while, like, it's a very good point with Mary Brown and Cody and their children, or their child, that as soon as the child started growing up and moving away, that was basically just the end. I mean, I don't think that they really lived together after that, did they?
No. Well, and that's when catfishing happened, like all this other stuff,
all
where
this
she's
other stuff,
desperate for
where she was looking for attention elsewhere because Cody wasn't there with her, and she had no one else living with her, which is one of the reasons that I look at my experience growing up in the FLDS as a positive thing, that all of us were living together in one home. Because when my father's first wife was an empty nester, right? Because all of her children had grown up and were adults and moving out, she was still living with all of us. She was still a mother to all of us in the same home. She couldn't get away from us. and so, but in on the other hand, you know, it was, I feel like, a positive thing because she had us to focus on, all of us younger children to focus on, instead of just being alone herself.
Well, and when they're in separate houses too, I feel like, how could you not, like, even I think Mary seemed to be accepting of it, like, oh, it makes sense that you have to go spend time with your younger children, and there's no children here. You need to spend time with your children. It's important. So the women are like, that makes sense. But how could you not be jealous? Polly doesn't ever seem like she's jealous, but how could you not be if you're losing children out of your home and you're watching your husband have brand new children with other wives or have little children? Because you know, well, he's their father, so he needs to be there for them.
Right.
And all of a sudden, instead of it being like this equal, everyone has children, there's going to come a point where Polly's not going to have any children at home, and Noni's going to have still young children at home. And how that can shift the dynamic, or whether or not they let it. Maybe they don't let it. Brady seems really, really good about his schedule. We know that's something Cody was not good at, was sticking to his schedule. And Brady's like determined, like,
to stick with what they've been doing for 20 years.
Yeah, it was a big deal, and you could tell that helped. I think it was the appraiser was like, so if you're in the doghouse with one, do you head over to the other wives? And he's like, absolutely not. That is like, I would be killed, and no, I would never be welcome back. No, you stick it out. If those are the nights, that's where you are. You know, unless there's a really big deal or something really big happening for medical reasons or things like that.
It's a valid question, though, from the appraiser that, you know, you have another home to go to. Instead of sleeping on the couch, you could go to someone else's home.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a lot more complicated than that, because you have this rotation. If you randomly show up at another wife's home, she's going to say, no, you're not welcome here, because I know what that's going to do between the relationship with me and that other wife you're leaving if you just come hang out with me. And the complications between all of that would be so challenging to try to navigate.
I think there was one time when Rhonda was worried that she had breast cancer, and I think he was supposed to be with Noni or with another wife or something, and they were like, no, go be with her. He's like, and I'm not even going to entertain that, because then if I went to Rhonda, she would be like, no, get back to Noni. That's where you're supposed to be tonight. So he definitely, like I said, did a much better job of trying to make sure that everything stayed equal and fair as much as you can in those situations. So.
Of course, there was still lots of jealousy because of even if he was rotating perfectly, if he gives attention differently to one of the wives and the other wife sees that, oh my gosh, he treated her like that 5 years ago when I was in that position, he didn't treat me like that. So therefore, does he like her more than me? And there's this thing where
you can't help but
you
compare.
Can never win. And that is why I could never do it. I could never do it. It's just, oh, I can't even imagine. But I will say one of the things that they have that makes it, I guess, a slight bit less complicated is that they were raised to believe in this patriarchy, which is that they should look up to and respect their husband.
Yeah.
And that is something that we see did not really go well for the Brown family as far as the wives looking up and respecting him as their leader. And so that's why we see so much just really just falling apart, because he didn't feel like, Cody Brown didn't feel like he was in charge, and the wives knew he wasn't in charge. And so
but they
it just
were also
didn't
different.
work.
They couldn't agree.
And
because the Williams family, a lot of times the women would get together and discuss things, and they all respected each other enough to try to get on the same page, which I thought was really cool. You know, they would have talks without Brady, and they would get together to try to discuss things and come up with ideas, or, hey, I want to change this or that. Like, what do you think about this? And that's another thing, that the Brown wives are all so very different, and they all had so much drama between them all the time, that there was very few instances where you saw them all coming together to try to come up with an idea. It was always, if two sister wives or more, then it's a fact, right? But that's because you could never get all four of them to agree on anything anyway.
Exactly.
Anyway, another big thing throughout this season was the talk of them moving. And this was really interesting to me, because later on they talk about the fact that the church leadership was wanting them to move and leave the community, because this is also not just a religious community. It's actually physically, there is a certain community that the church owns, a trust, which was a really interesting thing, is the fact that the church owned a trust a lot like the FLDS did.
Exactly. I thought about the little FLDS group. I know it wasn't as closed off, but they still owned a certain amount of property, it sounds like.
And the AUB, so he was saying that the church leaders were really wanting him to get off of that property, and they thought that he would do it sooner than what he did, because it sounds like they had left, according to like little hints, they had said probably like 6 or 7 years before that. Like Josh was a young teenager and I was going on a mission. So it had been a while, and they said that the church leaders were really like, hey, we need you like out of here. You're a bad example. We don't really want you around. But because Brady had built on the land, he didn't want to go without being bought out for all of his labor and for the house, so that he could go and buy them another house, which makes sense.
100%.
But Rosemary talked about the fact that the community considers it normal to, if you're going to leave, you have to leave everything behind, which is how it was in the FLDS.
Exactly. The idea of while you are here in the community and believing in all of this, what you do here belongs to the church, right? And it sounds like not quite as strict as the FLDS for them, but in the FLDS, similarly, it was everything belonged to the church.
Yeah.
Because, in the FLDS, it was much more, because even the wives and children technically belonged to the church in their eyes, because the church gave them their wife and gave them their family and gave them all of these things. And so if they were to leave, they were supposed to just leave it all behind and leave and never return. Or
Brady was just stubborn enough to say, no, I'm not getting off this property. You can try to force me if you want, but I'm staying here because I built the home. Because like Sam's cousin, Shem Fisher, him fighting to get back the home that he had built on UEP property, he said it cost him a crazy amount of money in legal fees to get the money, or to get that property back from the church, even though he had built with his own 2 hands like this beautiful home. So the fact that Brady was able to at least be stubborn enough to say, no, I need to be compensated for this house. It's worth something. I want compensation so I can build another house for my family outside this community, was pretty brave of him.
I wonder legally how that would work. If Brady has a right because he built the home, even though the home is on the property owned by the trust?
Yeah, I
Legally,
know.
could they kick him out? Are they trying to be somewhat fair with him, even though they don't want him there? I have to wonder. I don't know for sure, but I know that in the FLDS, the trust, the UEP trust, owned all of the property, and that's why they were able to just kick people off and say, "Huh, too bad. You're not welcome here. You can't be here anymore."
Yes, that might be the AUB playing nice, was to not just kick him off and say, we'll figure something out and we'll try to buy you out to get you
Yeah.
out of the community. But obviously that's super hard. You know, they're talking about moving to Seattle possibly to be closer to Brady's parents. Then, but all of the women, all of their families were in Utah. Some of them are still close to their families and were still accepted and loved by their families, and some weren't. So I can't imagine making such a big decision as a group and trying to, like, it's hard enough for two people to come up with ideas of where to move and be on the same page and decide where you want to be with your family. Like, that's
Yeah.
huge decisions, let alone for it to be between 6 people.
6 people. I mean, everybody having to agree with it. And then on top of that, the financial burden of moving that big of a family. Oh my gosh, especially nowadays. I mean, I know this was years ago, but
still,
sheesh, that's just a lot of money.
yeah. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is when they were in Seattle visiting Brady's parents, he baptized 2 of his children. Now, this kind of shocked us a little bit for a couple reasons, and Brady mentioned his reasoning, so I'll start with that. Brady said even though they no longer believed that it was the washing away of sins, he believed that it was a symbol of kids taking responsibility for their actions. An age of accountability is what it's called within Mormonism, that at the age of 8 is when you're accountable for the sins that you do commit. And so, you know, he's like being accountable for your sins and symbolic of coming of age is
Coming
what he
of
called
age. You know what blew my mind is that, so I'm sure they use similar wording to the FLDS and the mainstream LDS church, because all of the priesthood blessings and
Ordinances.
things and ordinances came from the same place originally, from back when Joseph Smith and Brigham Young introduced these things to the church. But I don't know for sure how similar or different they are. It seems like they were all pretty similar to my
He
knowledge.
still raised his hand to the square.
He raised his hand just like you see in the other groups. He did not say by the power of the priesthood, which makes me think that that's because he doesn't believe that he has that priesthood anymore, because he left the belief. But he still said the words, "as a representative of God to you," when he was baptizing his child.
Yeah.
I really don't quite understand. I don't know.
Brady, if you're out there, we want to have you on our channel and ask you these questions.
Yes. We don't even know where to reach out to him. We tried to look up some places, but there's just, we don't want to be disrespectful. We respect people's beliefs. I know that people have their reasons.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, especially coming from everything I've come from, I understand that. People have their reasons, but I really don't understand it, and I would love to understand
where he was in his journey.
What the
have this
reason for
cross-
that was.
Yeah, to have those paths cross, right? Because there would have to be some pieces of him that still held certain beliefs to even do that, even symbolically or traditionally. Rather than a lot of times when people leave, they say, I don't want anything to do with that, and I don't want my kids to be baptized, and I don't want this, or I don't want that. So he must still hold true to some of the belief systems, or some of the traditions are valuable to him in some way. And him saying that it was just like a coming of age, I mean, maybe that really is just it. But it seems like there's a deeper level purely because of the things that he said during the ceremony that made it seem like there was still some faith involved behind it.
Yeah, and another thing that it could be is that these younger children saw their older siblings get baptized when they were still in the church and believing, and they wanted the same for themselves. They said, well, they got baptized, I want to be baptized. And so maybe it was more for the children's sake, because that's what they wanted and asked for. But I guess if you don't believe in the religion at all, you can't really consider yourself sacrilegious. But if you are still semi-believing in it, I think that someone that would be a part of that church that he came from will look at that and say, oh, blasphemy, how dare he, right? Because it's so similar, but he's just twisting the words just a little tiny bit. So it was a shocker to me to see that. That was one of those pause moments where we
Yeah,
had to.
Sam's face.
I was like, whoa, I did not see that coming. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of religion, and we'll probably kind of end on this a little bit. A couple main things that they talked about, obviously needing to be kicked out of the community was super hard. The women talking about what it would be like to, if they had never been raised within the community, talking about like them all getting their ears pierced for the first times and what that felt like. And the fact that they were all on the same page about leaving their religion at the same time. I can't believe that 5 wives and Brady at the same time were all able to open up to each other and say that they all wanted to leave. That's miraculous, because a lot of times when people have faith journeys, it causes huge rifts in marriage, even between monogamous couples, right? So the fact that they all were, them talking about their experiences in drinking, and Polly was saying how she didn't know what on the rocks meant. And I laughed because that was totally me. I had no idea what on the rocks was. I was like, I don't know what they're talking about. So it took forever before I knew that that meant like over ice. I was like, what?
Right. No, it's tough to understand different phrases and things that are commonly lingo that's commonly used out there within these communities that don't ever talk about them, let alone experience any of this kind of thing like drinking. So
yeah. Lots of funny little, religious quirks that they're coming out of. But the big one was Josh being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the mainstream Mormon church, and he decided to serve a full-time mission, which is a huge deal. Within the mainstream LDS church, it's typical that every worthy young man, this is how it was worded my entire life, every worthy young man serve a mission. And they go somewhere, they're assigned somewhere throughout the world that they serve for 2 years to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ according to the LDS faith. And they go and share that message, and there's very limited contact. At this point, you could tell by the way they're talking about it that they could only email, which is how it used to be. Now they can talk on the phone, but that wasn't how it was for a very, 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 very long time.
No, it's been very recent, last few years, where now it's very common and people are allowed to make phone calls home. Is it weekly?
Once a week, yeah.
Once a week. But yes, so they didn't talk much about Josh's experience joining the LDS church and preparing to serve a mission and that kind of thing, which I hoped that they would talk more about it, because as many of you know, I did the same kind of journey. I went through similar things where I came from a fundamentalist church, and that transition into the mainstream LDS church, that it wasn't just like hey, I want to join the church, and that was that. There were a lot of steps to take to get to that position of being able to be baptized and then later serve a mission. One of those was to meet with an apostle of the church. And I don't know, they didn't say, did they?
They didn't.
I don't know if Josh had to meet with an apostle as well. And then preparing to serve for a mission was a big experience as well, because not only is the outside world new to you, but then you're leaving to a new country in many cases. For myself, I went to Chile. And so you leave this bubble, you are thrown out into the big world, and then very, very soon after that, you are in a different country, new culture, new language.
Different bubble.
It was a huge experience for me, that just a lot of new things that were changing so quickly for me in my life. So I can imagine how emotional that must have been for him. And you see some of that when his family was telling him goodbye when he was leaving, how emotional that was for them.
Well, and I'm very curious, they didn't talk to Polly a whole lot. She just said, like, I'm proud of him and I love him and I support him. I'm very curious more of her thoughts and feelings, because being raised in one church and then having your son serve a mission in a different church, even if you're proud of him in the sense of I'm proud of him doing what he desires to do, right? Like, that's a different kind of pride than being proud of him because it's what I think he should do.
Right.
And then aside from that, it being a completely different religion, not talking to, like, during this time, they mentioned, and when Sam was serving a mission and when my brothers were serving their missions, you only got to talk on the phone to family on Christmas and Mother's Day, twice a year. And other than that, it was emails or letters or packages, and that is it. And so my heart goes out for every mom that's had son serve missions. Like, oh my gosh. And even having brothers serve missions, you're just like, it's 2 years is a really long time, especially in formative years from like 18 to 20 or 19 to 21. You know, that's a long time to be gone.
A lot changes in those 2 years.
And I wonder how much
between that age.
Yeah, and I wonder how much harder that is if your son is serving a mission for a church that you don't belong to or believe in, if that makes it harder. Because like your parents dropped you off at the MTC for your mission, your biological
my
parents.
biological parents did, and that was a very special moment for me because they it was interesting. I feel like they wanted to support me because they loved me. And this was before I wasn't allowed to see them, and it was before things got very strict. It was actually on my mission when I was gone for 2 years where everything changed, and when I came back, it was 1,000 times more strict. I wasn't allowed to ever see my mother again. I wasn't allowed to ever drive out of the community and see people. When I first left, it was a little bit more. I wasn't allowed to go to my childhood home and walk in or anything like that, but I could drive through the community and hope to see someone, and if I did, I could say hi to them for a few minutes. But that was all taken away while I was in Chile. So anyway, all that to say that before I left, before things had changed, my biological mother and father did drop me off at the MTC because they wanted to show their support and love for me, not because they believed in the religion by any means. In fact, my mother told me that she was very disappointed that I would join another faith and go on this mission to serve this church that she doesn't believe is true. My father was a little bit more supportive just because, you know, what are you going to do? It's the decision that your adult child has made, right? You can't force.
Barely adult, but yes.
I was an adult. I was 19 at the time, so yeah. I knew everything at that age, right? Now I know a lot less, but anyway, he was just trying to be supportive because he knew it's what I had chosen to do, and that's what I was going to do no matter what. But yeah, it was special that they were at least showing their love for me, regardless of their belief in the religion.
Yeah. So that was really interesting. The end of the season, at first we thought they were trying to wrap up. Then they do a little clip of Carly's baby coming at 25 weeks, which was super sad. I did go and check, and her baby is okay and was able to get out of the NICU. But
that was quite the cliffhanger they leave you on there.
So we thought, okay, well, maybe they're going to wrap it all up with a pretty bow because this is going to be the last season. And then they do that snippet of Carly's baby being born at 25 weeks, and we're like, can you imagine this in real time, like waiting for the next season? And then there's just nothing.
Yeah, it was a weird way to end an entire series. And I don't personally believe that they were going to wrap it up at that point. And then maybe that just wasn't getting enough attention, and so they brought it to an end because there wasn't enough drama for people to keep watching or something. But yeah, it seemed very abrupt.
Yeah, very abrupt ending. But overall, it was fun to get to see a different family after watching so much of Sister Wives and watching the Brown family implode, explode, all of the plodes. And I mean, we'll definitely be keeping on that for season 19 that's coming up in a couple months. So don't worry about that. But this was a fun comparison to see a family that was trying really, really hard. And yeah, I don't know. It seemed like they were doing it a little bit more successfully.
Yeah.
At this point.
From what we hear, they are still together. If someone out there that is close to the Williams family know more details, we would love to hear that. Based on what we can see and find out there, they are still all together. And the show didn't end by saying where they live now, whether they stayed in Utah or moved to Washington State. So I'm not sure about that, but it's interesting. There's not a whole lot of information out there on the World Wide Web.
Maybe that's what they
about
wanted.
Them.
Maybe they were like, you know what, this isn't that great. We should just go back to living a normal life, our normal polygamous life, as normal as can be.
But it was interesting. Definitely a very different show from the Sister Wives that we were used to seeing before this one.
Yes. If you want to hear more of what it was like for Sam to grow up in polygamy, or us compare what it was like for him versus these reality TV show families, or people from other polygamous groups, then please like and subscribe.
Yes. Thank you all so much for being here with us once again, and we look forward to talking with you soon.
Talk to y'all soon.